Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank the representative of Gabon for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, today is the last day of a week which was anything but simple, and it will be remembered by one and all for the information hullabaloo which was created by Ukraine, its Western sponsors, related to the one-year mark of the Russian special military operation in Ukraine. And it would seem that this is what what the promise boils down to, the promise made by Mr. Kuleba in January to have a peace summit in New York, so as to analyze what was said by our former Western partners during this week. We could, without exaggeration, convene a whole political science conference, and possibly that this will happen in the future. Well, people will want to cast a retrospective eye on this. And for such a political science conference, we could propose the following title: Yet Another Missed Opportunity to Peacefully Resolve the Ukrainian Crisis. And this would be right, because any expression using the word peace, which are being disingenuously used, including today by high representatives of Ukraine and Western countries, what is meant is actually something completely different. What is meant is a capitulation of Russia and inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia, ideally followed by the disintegration of the country and withdrawing the territories it includes. These true goals of Western interference in Ukrainian affairs were clearly displayed, by the way, almost exactly 9 years ago on the day of the Maidan anti-constitutional coup on the 21st of February 2014. And people didn't hide them from the very beginning. And these are exactly the goals which resulted in the fact that on our borders we have a hostile, nationalistic, Russophobic regime which decided that they would resolve the Ukrainian issue with zeal. Our British colleague yesterday, when she spoke in the General Assembly, and she criticized the Belarus submitted amendments to the draft resolution, she stated then that the amendments equate the aggressor and the victim. Are you not at all concerned by the fact that your victim is up to its elbows in blood and Nazi tattoos, and the 9-year-old period of elimination of Russian-speaking citizens in Donbass? Do you think it's normal? Why do you think it's normal for Ukraine to send guns and tanks against unarmed civilians in the east and bomb them? Only because those people do not want to give up on their own identity. Because that is exactly what the Kiev regime did in the summer of 2014. And it was then the internal Ukrainian armed conflict erupted. Do you think that we were supposed to resign ourselves to this situation? Please allow me to remind you that its aggression against Yugoslavia was justified by NATO by the campaign of terror and the need for the Kosovars to live in security and enjoy universal human rights and freedoms on an equal basis. This is a quote from a statement made by NATO on the 23rd of April, 1999. So then you and your other colleagues then deny the Russian-speaking Ukrainians of the universal rights and freedoms if you present the Kiev authorities who attack them as a victim. You also are silent about the campaign of terror unleashed against them. For us, it is obvious that Ukraine is not a victim, because if Ukraine did not wage war against the people in Donetsk and Lugansk, as you condoned it, but rather heeded their aspirations, then there would have been no need for our special military operation. And the Crimea probably would have remained within Ukraine, because the people of the Crimea only decided to choose reunification with Russia only after there were direct threats from the Kiev authorities. I would like to take opportunity of the fact that we have Ms. Colonna and Ms. Baerbock here at the meeting, and I would like to raise yet one more very inconvenient for our Western colleagues topic, namely the Minsk agreements. We have all heard recently the confessions made by François Hollande, by Angela Merkel, and by Boris Johnson. They said that neither France nor Germany nor the United Kingdom ever viewed the agreement seriously, had no intention to urge the Ukrainian authorities to implement them, and only used the agreement so to bide the time and give Kiev time to prepare for a war with Russia. Now, even if you disregard the dimension side of the issue, and we have no illusion about the moral qualities of our Western colleagues by now, what we have here is that the leaders of these states openly basically stated that they knowingly violated Security Council Resolution 2202, which enshrined the Minsk agreements. But this does not stop the ministers of foreign affairs of these very states from lecturing other member states here in the Council today. Furthermore, a trite cliche we heard during this week, and it appeared a lot earlier. It consists of the fact that if Russia is to end the war will end, and if the Ukraine will stop fighting, there will be no Ukraine. It sounds pretty, but it's absolutely false. Where, when, and from whom did you hear that the goal of our military operation is to destroy Ukraine, to de-Ukrainize Ukraine? We have never stated such a goal. We have always wanted to have right next to us, as was the case before, to have a friendly neighbor who doesn't threaten us, does not discriminate against anyone, and is not trying to resurrect Nazism. Therefore, this slogan of yours, in actual fact, should be as follows. If Russia stops hostilities, the Ukraine will continue discrimination against the Russian-speaking people, those who do not want to live with violence. Its rights and freedom will continue to be violated, and the glorification of Nazi criminals will continue. If Ukraine ends hostilities, it will get the chance to be reborn as a normal, peace-loving state and will save many thousands of lives. And that is why we have stated on many an occasion that we are ready to negotiate about how the goals of our special military operation could be implemented using peaceful means. But of course, any mechanism which are underpinned by other kind of scenarios, we are not prepared to consider. Colleagues, we have stated many times this week that ending hostilities in Ukraine is not something that the collective West is interested in, and only collective West alone. They, as we know for a fact, prevented the Kiev regime from making peace in April last year, and our Western colleagues currently are happy with everything. The Russians and Ukrainians are killing each other, the Western defense companies are getting fabulous profits, and they have a platform for testing new weaponry, and NATO is getting rid of its old weapons and is rearming. But Washington is also weakening its European competitors, who are displaying heretofore unseen servility and impotence. And this is something that we talked about at length in this chamber yesterday. And most importantly, the West is rubbing its hands and hoping that it will weaken Russia, will threaten China, and will keep its monopoly position in the world, remain the only so-called blossoming garden, as was stated by Mr. Borrell, on this jungle planet. Then the top golden billion will continue enriching itself at the expense of others, pitting countries against each other, using their natural resources and exploiting its people. And that is what is meant by the rules-based order, which Russia dared infringed upon because we don't want to accept a Russophobic wasp's nest at our borders. We want to make sure that the developing countries have no illusions about what this conflict is really about. And of course, resolving this conflict is inseparable from the issues having to do with just and indivisible system of European and Atlantic security. Currently, it only works for the United States and its NATO allies. They arrogated to themselves the right to interfere in any international issues and internal affairs of other countries. Ukraine is a very good example. Their bases are deployed on our borders in violation of key understandings ending the period of Cold War. Western leaders lied to us then and want to continue deceiving us now. For them, the right of NATO to expand uncontrollably is absolute, and they keep telling us tall tales about how much money they spend for development purposes, as was just done by State Secretary Blinken. Let me just recall here that after the Cold War alone, the United States conducted 251 military operations abroad and inflicting untold damage on those countries. Even if you pay 100 times more than you do now, you will not be able to make up for that damage. The collective West need to understand and accept the fact that there are other players on the planet with their own interests, and you have to coexist with them, or you can even cooperate them in mutual interests. But this has to be done on an equal and respectful basis. A unipolar world is in the past, and it's our mutual interest to make sure that we transition to a multipolar world with as few upheavals as possible. And we would like to hope that the Ukrainian crisis will be the last hot phase of such a transition. This is how a genuine discussion of peace should look like, possibly within the UN. And the sooner we start talking about it like this, the better. We tried to start such a dialogue before the special military operation at the end of 2021, but all our proposals to have such a dialogue was spurned by the West. The price was paid by the Ukrainian people. The Kiev regime sacrificed the Ukrainian people for the purposes of Western geopolitical interests. We welcome genuine efforts to have peace, such as, for example, the Chinese proposal. Though the choices here is up to our former Western partners, first and foremost Washington. Obviously, after everything we've discovered about you this year, after limitless and disgusting Russophobia and the attempts to cancel Russia, after supplying the Zelensky regime with weapons which were used to kill women, children, and the elderly in Donbass, after your Ukrainian venture and trying to create difficulties for us on our borders, our relations will never be the same. We do not believe you, and restoring our trust will be very difficult, if at all possible, because what's important here are deeds, not words. But attempting to do this, it's in your interest. At this point, you're just worsening the situation by continuing to pump the Kiev regime with weapons and helping them in the battlefield. And you leave us with no option other than to eliminate threats to Russia from the territory of Ukraine militarily. Please bear this in mind when you start making up new anti-Russian initiatives at the UN and pass them off as evidence of support for Ukraine in the world. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I give the floor now to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, Mozambique wishes to thank the Presidency of Malta for convening this important meeting. We express our profound gratitude to the Secretary General for his enlightening statement. Mr. President, a year has elapsed since the outbreak of the conflict in Ukraine. Its tragic consequences and spillover effects and ramifications continue to reverberate at local, regional, and global levels, and no end is in sight. As with every conflict, civilians, especially women and children, are bearing the brunt of the violence, and those alive will remain traumatized forever. On the other hand, the conflict has negatively impacted the world trade and supply chains. It has brought economic damage with global trade disruptions affecting transportation costs and virtually all global value chains. The socio-economic impact on developing countries, especially Africa, has been grave. The IMF has found that while the African continent was slowly rising from the COVID pandemic, the conflict in Ukraine is now threatening this recovery. Many of our countries are vulnerable due to the higher energy and food prices, reduced tourism, and potentially difficult accessing international capital markets. From an African perspective, we are all too familiar with the devastating effects of conflicts. We know that wars only result in the suffering of people, and it is our collective duty, the duty of the international community as a whole, to work towards resolving conflict through peaceful and negotiated solutions. We need to uphold the fundamental principle of collective security enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, according to which the security of one is the security of all. Mr. President, in the past, the global community has shown that it is possible to overcome hate and mutual suspicion and find the path to the negotiating table. It is therefore imperative that the international community support all the diplomatic efforts to end the conflict in Ukraine. This requires the support of all nations, particularly those who hold a seat on the Security Council. We need to assist the parties involved to engage in negotiations and reach a negotiated solution. This means building on the few bright spots of this year-long conflict, such as the Black Sea Initiative, the regular exchange of prisoners, and the Secretary General's Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy, and Finance. And more importantly, Mozambique thinks that we need to strongly support the good office of the Secretary General of the United Nations and tap on his reservoir of moral authority in search for the settlement of the conflict. Mr. President, Mozambique has a long-standing commitment to promoting peace and security in our region and beyond. As a country that has experienced numerous conflicts in the past, we understand the importance of supporting diplomatic efforts and respecting humanitarian law to bring about peace. The one-year anniversary of this conflict must serve as a reminder for the international community to work together towards finding a negotiated solution to the conflict, guided by the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his statement. 1 year after the start of the conflict, we see an armed stalemate on the ground, triumphalist rhetoric on both sides, and prospects of new military offensives. We should put aside illusions about a military solution to this crisis. We need to discuss the return of the parties to the negotiating table. President Lula has made Brazil's position clear, faithful to our diplomatic tradition. We condemn the Russian invasion and the territorial violation of a sovereign state, Ukraine. But a year later, we understand that time has come to also give voice to those who want to speak of ways to build peace. Violence, which affects the most vulnerable, should stop with no preconditions. International humanitarian law and its principles are not optional. They are mandatory at all times and under all circumstances. Respecting and ensuring respect for international humanitarian law is essential to the protection of civilians. Mr. President, Brazil does not come with the intention of presenting a ready-made solution. We need to explore paths that seek to create conditions for the end of the conflict. We are convinced that countries like Brazil, which are not directly involved in the conflict, have a constructive role to play in fostering dialogue. We acted in this sense during discussions on the most recent resolution of the General Assembly, adopted yesterday. Member States called on the parties for the cessation of hostilities, an expression that appears for the first time at the suggestion of Brazil. The resolution also reaffirmed the resolute commitment of the international community to uphold the core principles of the UN Charter and international law, while underscoring the need to reach peace. We also encouraged careful consideration of the causes of conflict so that mutual resentments and suspicions do not manifest in future violence. We should never lose sight of the human drama, nor ignore the global economic impact of the war, in particular with regard to rising input costs for agricultural and food production. Mr. President, Brazil will continue to persevere on this path. We are convinced there is enough willingness among member states for avoiding, in the future, new anniversaries on the duration of the war, such as the sad mark of 1 year completed today. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, I thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing. It has been 1 year since the full outbreak of the Ukraine crisis. Its development is causing great concern to all of us. The international community, while deeply concerned about the prospect of the expansion and prolonging of the conflict, should think cool-headedly about how to stop the fighting as soon as possible and how to realize long-term peace and stability in Ukraine and Europe. China issued earlier today a position document on the political settlement of the Ukraine crisis. We have always taken an objective and impartial stance based on the merits of the issue and are ready to continue to play a responsible and constructive role in easing the situation and resolving the crisis. Here I'd like to highlight the following points. First, when handling and solving international disputes, universally recognized international law, including the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, must be upheld. The sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all countries must be effectively guaranteed. Observing universally recognized international law and the basic norms governing international relations bears on the stability of the international system and international fairness and justice. They should be equally and uniformly applied in every place and on every issue without exception. Some country, while stressing sovereignty and territorial integrity on the Ukraine issue, is blatantly interfering in other countries' internal affairs and undermining their sovereignty and territorial integrity. This reveals its double standard at full display. The international community is clear-eyed about this. Second, to facilitate a political solution to the Ukraine issue, there is a need to pursue common security. Security is not an exclusive right enjoyed only by some countries. The security of a country should not be pursued at the expense of others. Strengthening or even expanding military blocs will only undermine regional security. and will never bring about peace. Russia, Ukraine, and European countries are neighbors that cannot physically move away. To realize lasting peace and stability in Europe, the Cold War mentality and bloc confrontation must be abandoned, and the legitimate security concerns of all countries must be taken seriously and addressed properly so as to build a balanced, effective, and sustainable regional security architecture. Third, conflicts have no winners. Long-term diplomatic negotiations is the only right way to solve the Ukraine crisis. The international community should promote peace and talks with the highest sense of urgency and work to create enabling factors and platforms for the resumption of negotiation. Bringing parties to the conflict back to the negotiating table is not going to be easy, but it is the first step toward a political solution. Just now, Secretary General Guterres also appealed that we give peace a chance. We call on Russia and Ukraine to resume negotiations without any preconditions. Ukraine is not an arena for fights between major countries. No one should seek to benefit from the conflict at the cost of the Ukrainian people. Fourth, it is imperative to never cross the red line of nuclear security under any circumstances. Nuclear weapons must never be used and nuclear war must never be fought. Faced with the risk that the Ukraine crisis could lead to an escalation of the conflict, major countries bear special and important responsibility to maintain communication and coordination and to do everything they can to prevent a nuclear crisis. The international community should jointly oppose armed attacks against nuclear power plants or other peaceful nuclear facilities, ensure strict compliance with the Convention on Nuclear Safety, among others, and support the IAEA in playing a constructive role in promoting the safety and security of peaceful nuclear facilities. Fifth, the humanitarian crisis is worsening and should be proactively and properly addressed. The international humanitarian law is a code of conduct that must be strictly observed in conflict situations. Relevant parties should avoid attacking civilians or civilian facilities, protect the vulnerable, including women and children, ensure humanitarian access, and respect the basic rights of prisoners of war. The international community should increase its humanitarian assistance, help restore civilian infrastructure, ensure basic livelihood of refugees and the displaced persons with a view to preventing a humanitarian crisis on a larger scale. At the same time, humanitarian operations should in earnest follow the principles of neutrality and impartiality and avoid politicization. Sixth, each country is responsible for the important task of promoting its people's livelihood and development. Efforts should be made to manage the spillovers of the crisis. The Ukraine crisis has far-reaching impacts, but the developing countries are not parties to this conflict and should not pay an excessively high price for it. Some relevant parties have been resorting to unilateral sanctions and maximum pressure, which cannot solve any issue and can only undermine the stability of the global industrial and supply chain and exacerbate the global food, energy, and financial crises. We hope that the relevant parties take responsible actions and stop abusing unilateral sanctions and long-arm jurisdiction. The Black Sea Grain Initiative and the MOU signed by the UN and Russia on the export of food products and fertilizers have great significance for ensuring global food security and should be implemented fully and effectively in a balanced manner. Mr. President, the road to peace will not be smooth, but no matter how complicated the situation is, we must never give up our hopes for peace and efforts for peace. On the Ukraine issue, China has always stood and will continue to stand on the side of peace and dialogue. We stand ready to work with all parties to promote a political solution to the Ukraine crisis and strive for the early arrival of peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Josep Borrell, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy.
Thank you, Mr. President, Secretary General. Today, exactly 1 year ago, Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, starting a massive invasion of a peaceful neighbor. And for 1 year, we have all seen the Ukrainians fighting to defend their country. They deserve the solidarity of everyone around the world, every country, and every person. I will just make two essential points. First, why Russia's war of choice matter to all of us. And second, how to get peace. We need to be clear. I said war of choice because this war is the war of President Putin choosing war. And for 1 year, we have seen the horrors, 30 million people homeless, 20 million in need of humanitarian assistance, and tens of thousands of Ukrainians forced to leave their country and seek refuge across Europe. Families torn apart. In a catalogue of crimes, the forced deportation of tens of thousands of Ukrainian children stands out for its depravity. Abduction of innocent Ukrainian children, the changing of their personal status, including nationality, to be adopted by Russian families is a clear violation of human rights and international law, and violates also the Geneva Convention. These children, these Ukrainian children, need to be returned to Ukraine immediately. So, crimes against humanity. I've been to Bucha and seen for myself the civilians killed, with some having their hands tied behind their back before they were executed. And who can forget Mariupol? I would again like to pay tribute to the United Nations for their efforts in securing the safe passage of civilians trapped inside the Azovstal steel plant. Russian forces have been shelling Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure for months. Air raid sirens have become a disturbingly regular feature of Ukrainian lives, as I witnessed myself, and many of you, when I was in Kiev 10 days ago. We in our
Yes, 1 year on, the war's toll is devastating for the Ukrainian people. However, the effects of the war are also global. Spikes in food insecurity and energy insecurity are leading to price spikes whose effects are catastrophic for the most vulnerable people. Rising costs of foodstuffs and essential goods have added an additional burden to the already difficult daily lives of many countries around the world. It is for that reason that this war affects us all. The European Union and its member states have for a year contributed to lightening this burden that is the consequences of the war. In Africa, for example, more than 1.5 billion euros have been disbursed for food security initiatives in the countries most affected in the Sahel, Lake Chad, and in the Horn of Africa.
President, this war matters. Yes, this war matters a lot, both for the principles at stake and for the shockwaves it's creating. And it needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. And this brings me to the second point, maybe the most important one. How do we get to peace? Because everybody is asking for peace. But how? How do we get to peace? Let's hear here at the United Nations and around the world a growing clamor for peace. That was the clear message that the General Assembly sent yesterday. While the Security Council has been blocked, the General Assembly stated, with an overwhelming majority of 141 versus 7, that the world condemns the aggression, that Russia must withdraw its troops, that the world wants and needs peace, but not just any peace. No, we want a just peace. based on international law and United Nations Charter. And it is urgent for the Kremlin to hear this message and to act on it. Look into the future. We need to build on this resolution and make it happen. President Zelensky has presented a 10-point peace plan, and we support it. Because we, the European Union, we will remain ready to work with all genuine partners and ideas that support Ukraine's effort to secure a comprehensive, just and lasting peace as the United Nations General Assembly voted, based on the United Nations Charter and international law. And meanwhile, we will continue to support Ukraine to defend itself and protect its people, because the search of peace and our support to Ukraine go hand in hand, both things together, not either or, both. Search for peace and support to Ukraine. And with that, I want to make a final point. Our principal support for Ukraine does not come at the expense of our engagement elsewhere in the world. On the contrary, the European Union remains fully mobilized to promote sustainable peace elsewhere, because we know that there are many more wars, many more tragedies, many more problems around the world that needs our support and our concern. It's not instead of, it's on top of. We continue doing the same thing that we have been doing until now. And we have a strong track record on engagement around the world, financially, politically, with more than 5,000 women and men deployed in 21 crisis management operations. Just this week, we launched 2 more, one in Armenia and another in Niger. Yes, there are many other problems, many other wars, many other sufferances around the world. We take care of them. We work for the peace in Ukraine and be that reliable partner for peace around the world, wherever the peace is in danger and people sufferances. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Borrell for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Rastislav Kase, Minister for Foreign and European Affairs of Slovakia.
Mr. President, 1 year ago, the Security Council had a meeting in this very room, around this very table, and the main purpose of the meeting was to discuss the unprecedented military buildup of the Russian force posing a threat to international peace and security. The last hope to persuade Russia to de-escalate the situation and engage constructively in negotiations was shattered with the words of the ambassador of Ukraine at the time, warning members of the Security Council that it was already too late to speak about the de-escalation, as the Russian president had declared a war. And we all know this happened despite numerous assurances of Russia claiming to have no intention to invade its neighbor. This was the night when the whole international community was informed of Russia's decision to begin an unprovoked and unjustified military aggression against Ukraine, in violation of all fundamental values and principles of the UN Charter and international law. Yes, that's the Russian Federation holding the permanent seat in this chamber is primarily responsible for maintaining peace and security. Needless to say, at that moment, the faith in multilateralism was shaken from its foundations. Despite the pain and suffering which have been caused since the senseless war started, the Russian Federation has been ignoring calls of the international community to end this agony. And I do not really understand in which parallel universe depriving millions of innocent people of electricity, heat, water, and plunging the country into darkness can be justified under the pretext of so-called special military operation. It is rather cynical how systematic and thorough Russia has been in spreading propaganda and distorting the facts. It seems that Russia has been promoting some kind of alternative reality, a behavior which we condemn once again. We reiterate our call for an immediate cessation of Russian military activities in Ukraine and unconditional withdrawal of all Russian troops from the whole territory of Ukraine. This also concerns temporarily occupied Crimea, as well as other territories of Ukraine, including those where the Russian Federation, together with local puppet authorities, orchestrated the so-called referendum in blatant breach of international rules. We are extremely concerned about the number of civilian casualties enumerated since the beginning of the invasion to Ukraine. According to OHCHR, it's well over 8,000 killed and over 13,000 injured. But needless to say, we all know that the real numbers are much bigger than that. Slovakia has stood by Ukraine since the very beginning of Ukraine defense against Russia aggression, and we will continue our steadfast support of Ukraine, including its independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, until this shameless war is over. However, it's also one fact which is undeniable. The war will be over one day, and those responsible for all crimes committed will be held responsible and brought to justice. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Kashev, for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Bogdan Aurescu, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Romania.
Mr. President, I commend the Maltese Presidency of the Security Council for organizing this open debate. For a year now, Romania, a direct neighbor to Ukraine, has been at the forefront of helping Ukraine and countering the multifaceted consequences of the atrocious, illegal and unprovoked war waged by the Russian Federation. A permanent member of the Security Council against Ukraine, a sovereign independent country. The impact of this irrational war has reached far and wide. Violations of international humanitarian law and the attacks on critical civilian infrastructure made millions of Ukrainians flee. Grain and energy chains have been disrupted, leading to sharp increase of energy prices and the threat of famine all over the globe, and especially to the most vulnerable in the south. Fear of a nuclear catastrophe daunt us again. Hybrid tactics test or try to intimidate us, putting pressure on Ukraine and its neighbors like the Republic of Moldova, others in the Black Sea region or the wider European continent and the Euro-Atlantic security area as a whole. This war represents a direct attack on the integrity of the rules-based international system, our security, prosperity and core values. But in front of this threat, nothing is clearer than this. We will stand united and strong for as long as it takes. Ukraine will win, and Russia will bear the responsibility for what it has done. Our call is also clear. Russia must abide by the rules of international law. It must unconditionally cease the use of force and withdraw completely and immediately from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. We are here today in the Security Council chamber, the guarantor of international peace and security, to stand by the side of the UN Charter and international law, and reiterate that there is only one way to end this aggression. I welcome the resolution adopted yesterday in the General Assembly by a very large majority of states, which put the principles of the UN Charter above all, including national or regional interests. It is in our power to mitigate the effects of this war on the future. From day on of this war, Romania acted in full solidarity with the brave Ukrainian people. We made considerable investments in food, energy and transportation infrastructure, along with welcoming over 3.6 million Ukrainian refugees that have transited our territory. So far, we have facilitated the delivery of over 13 million tons of Ukrainian grain, contributing to global food security efforts. Romania hopes for a positive outcome in the long run and the continuation of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Romania has also been a strong supporter of the efforts to seek accountability for all serious crimes committed in Ukraine, including the crime of aggression. We joined the core group of states that works alongside Ukraine to identify the most appropriate legal basis to establish a tribunal to this purpose. The ongoing war in Ukraine has a major impact in the region. We have extended a helping hand to our neighbor, the Republic of Moldova, the country most affected by the war except Ukraine itself. And I must bring to your attention that we are concerned with Russia's latest plans to destabilize the country, which we condemned. In this respect, it is absolutely unacceptable to see threatening rhetoric like the one including in the statement of the Russian Foreign Ministry of today, by which it announced that the Russian army would, I quote, adequately respond to so-called provocations or attacks against the Russian compatriots and the military personnel and depot from the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova. Such provocative behavior based on nothing, based on ungrounded allegations, is completely unacceptable. And we fully support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Moldova within its internationally recognized borders. As we approach the one-year milestone since the beginning of the war, all of us, including Romania, witnessed the Russian propaganda intensifying, spreading fake narratives in an attempt to undermine the unity of our societies and our efforts to support Ukraine. We must combat these malign influences, as we must continue to stand united to defend our values. The Romanian people must be mindful about the Russian-inspired stories they read and hear, but they shouldn't question our support for Ukraine. Supporting Ukraine means supporting Romania. Mr. President, as said before, this is the test of our generation. We have to work together at all the different layers of this conflict and bring peace back to its deserving place. Our message is straightforward: peace in full respect of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, peace in full respect of the UN Charter and of its fundamental principles of international law. And one political and moral principle is clear: negotiations can start only when Ukraine is ready, and the way victory looks like must be defined by Ukraine. Romania's support for Ukraine remains solid for as long as it takes. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Aurescu, for his statement. And I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Zbigniew Rau, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Poland.
Mr. President, Excellencies, let me begin with expressing my gratitude to Malta for convening this important meeting and to the Secretary General for his valuable insights. Excellencies, I believe that we should focus today on three main things. First of all, the accurate diagnosis of the situation. Then, the search for an adequate reaction. And finally, the steps that need to be implemented. So, let us start with contrasting the truth against the disinformation and misleading propaganda. And the truth is that exactly a year ago, Russia decided to start its illegal aggression against Ukraine. Period. Since then, Russia's war has been putting international institutions to a test. It is testing our commitment to the principles that protect us all. The humanitarian costs of this war are horrifying. The aggression has caused the biggest crisis in Europe since the Second World War. Russia's campaign of terror and its deliberate targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure are utterly unacceptable. The Kremlin's actions are driven by the will to destroy the Ukrainian nation, its heritage, and its future. That is why I'm convinced that Russia's barbaric aggression against Ukraine is not a bilateral or regional issue. It is a concern of all states. And we all have a duty to bring these atrocities to an end. Secondly, the prohibition of aggression, of genocide, and of crimes against humanity are jus cogens norms. This means that no derogation from them is permitted. Poland advocates for the full accountability for all the violations and compensation for the inflicted damage. Saying so, what should be the guiding principle for this approach? Nobody has doubts whatsoever that when we look at the domestic laws of our countries, they stand on the premise that justice means the protection of the vulnerable against the more powerful. The assertion is that in a well-ordered society, the vulnerable need to feel as secure as the powerful. And the powerful, when they trespass the law, need to be brought fully accountable so that others are not encouraged to commit similar crimes in the future. If the international community is to draw from this horrific war any right conclusions for the future generations, Poland believes that we are required to search for analogical solutions in the international law system. Therefore, I call to introduce the same rule of protecting the vulnerable against powerful villains in our international relations, both in the legal dimension and political practice. Let us build a well-ordered international community. In order to achieve that, international institutions with all their resources must stand on the side of the harmed and execute accountability and compensation from the aggressors, no matter how strong and powerful they are. I cannot envision the world without adhering to this rule. Can you? Thirdly, with respect to this golden rule, Poland's support to Ukraine is and will remain unwavering. Millions of Ukrainians found safe refuge in our country. In 2022, Poland spent over $9 billion, that is 1.5% of our GDP, on humanitarian assistance to Ukrainian refugees, according to the recent OECD estimate. We provide support and host over a dozen of UN agencies and international organizations helping Ukraine from our territory. We will remain steadfast in our support for as long as it takes, because we are motivated by the will to protect the Ukrainians and every other nation in need. Our actions are about safeguarding collective peace and security. If we do not act in solidarity now and shrug from defending the fundamental values of international law, tomorrow it can be too late. Mr. President, Excellencies, Poland stands firmly behind the values and principles of the UN Charter. We refuse to go back to power politics and spheres of influence. The international community has the strength and will to stand by Ukraine and to defend the UN Charter so that the power of argument not the argument of power, prevails. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Rao for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Peter Szijjártó, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary.
Mr. President, dear Jan, thank you so much for organizing this session of the Security Council today at the first anniversary. I'm representing a country, Hungary, which is a direct neighbor to Ukraine. Therefore, the impacts of the war are severe and immediate on us. And we are faced with the tragic consequences basically on a daily basis, as we are witnessing the suffering of the people caused by this war. We have received a bit more than 1 million refugees from Ukraine so far. Unfortunately, mostly torn apart families. I have to tell you, it's heartbreaking to see the mothers arriving with the children, sometimes with the grandparents, mostly with one backpack to Hungary. We do want to help them. We are doing our best to help them. We give equal access to the refugees from Ukraine when it comes to our education and healthcare system. 1,300 schools and kindergartens in Hungary have already been enrolling refugee kids and students from Ukraine. And we give incentive to the companies in Hungary in order to employ refugees. All this together with many other measures are adding up for the largest humanitarian operation carried out in the history of Hungary. And I have to tell you that we are going to continue this large humanitarian action as long as it is needed. And from the neighborhood, we see it very clearly that this war brings a lot of suffering. This war does not have winners. This war does only have losers. And the longer this war lasts, the more losers there will be, more damage will be caused, and more people will be killed. And let me tell you that I'm representing a nation which has a number of casualties in this war as well. Given the fact that there is a Hungarian community living in the western part of Ukraine, members of which are Ukrainian citizens, obviously. So many of them are conscripted into the Ukrainian army. They are fighting on the front lines, and many of them have died already. And let me emphasize that we do not want more people to die in this war. In this regard, I'd like to underline the position of Hungary that we would consider as the #1 duty of the international community under such circumstances to save lives of the people and prevent more casualties. And the question is raised here how it is possible, obviously. And the answer is that you can save lives with peace. With deliveries of weapons, with further packages of sanctions, I don't see how we save lives of the people. But with peace, we definitely could. And I know very well that for this position of ours, we are usually under very heavy criticism. Not only heavy criticism, but on many occasions, totally insane accusations are being put on Hungary and this government. But those who criticize us and educate us, judge us, they have not lost any lives in this war, unlike we Hungarians. So that's why, Mr. President, dear Jan, dear colleagues, we call for immediate ceasefire and peace talks to be launched, as an outcome of which, hopefully, a sustainable peace could be reached. And it is obvious that peace cannot be made in case there are no channels of communication open. If channels of communication are being cut, stuck, closed, it means from our perspective that even the hope for peace is being given up. And once again, as a representative of a neighboring country, witnessing the suffering on a daily basis, I humbly ask you to concentrate on how to stop this war, how to avoid more people to die, and how to make peace. And dear Jan, together with you, I'm representing, and many of others, a generation which, thanks God, did not have to experience how life was during the World War. World War, a global war. And we do hope that neither us nor our children or our hopeful future grandchildren will do have to experience such a life. And so far, this war came with global impacts. That's not the question. The question is whether we can avoid this war becoming a global war, a world war. Whether we can avoid measures, decisions, and even sometimes statements which bring the risk of escalation and prolongation of this war. I think all of us should refrain from such kind of measures, decisions, and statements which prolong and escalate this war. A third world war would be a real tragedy. A third world war would bring us to where hopefully none of us would like to go. In this regard, I think it's key that there is no direct confrontation being established between NATO and the Russian Federation. In NATO, we have a clear decision that NATO is not party to the conflict, and we do hope that this decision of ours will be respected by all. Dear Jan, dear colleagues, Hungarian people are not responsible for this war, but Hungary and the Hungarian people have already paid a high price. That's why we all know that we are in the 25th hour. We are in the 25th hour. So let's try to concentrate on how to stop this war, how to put an end to this war, how to establish an immediate ceasefire, and how to launch peace talks, which hopefully will bring us to a sustainable and fair peace. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Ziato, for his statement, and I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Annalena Baerbock, Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs of Germany.
Colleagues, Bucha, Kharkiv, Mariupol, Bakhmut. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is causing nothing but destruction, suffering, and death. Yesterday, the General Assembly sent a powerful message against this ruthless war. An overwhelming majority of 141 states stood united for peace in Ukraine. A peace that is just, comprehensive, and lasting. And the General Assembly presented a peace plan. A peace plan that is based on the principles of our UN Charter. Today, the eyes of the world are on the Security Council, the body that bears primary responsibility for the maintenance of peace and security in this world. Every further effort to move towards peace from a member of this Council is, in my point of view, valuable. But peace must mean peace. Peace must not mean that we ignore who the aggressor is and who the victim, because subjugation is not peace. Not naming the aggressor would mean accepting a world in which the mighty rule. It would mean accepting a world in which bombing schools, kidnapping children, and shooting people off their bicycle is part of foreign policy. Not standing by the side of the victim would mean a world in which none of us would be able to sleep peacefully, because we would all have to fear an attack by our stronger neighbor. To prevent such a world, the United Nations was founded. That's why we cannot stand idly by. The Charter obliges us, the nations of the world, to act. Now that some of you claim that by sanctioning the aggressor, by standing by the side of Ukraine, by supporting Ukraine by its right to self-defense, we are adding fuel to the fire. I would like to ask you, where would Ukraine, that voluntarily gave up its nuclear weapons because it believed in peace, would be today if we had not supported its right to defend itself, supported their people, elderly, mothers, fathers, children, together with so many international partners. Can we imagine what this would mean? To have more Buchas, Kharkivs, Mariupols, more Bakhmuts, more atrocities against civilians, more children drawing pictures with a house where their beloved ones once lived. Imagine more crimes against humanity, and we would have stand idle by? I don't want to imagine such a world. I don't want to be responsible for such a world. I think most of us don't want to be responsible for such a world. Therefore, I would like to underline what Secretary Blinken said. If Ukraine stops defending itself, Ukraine ends. If we would stop standing at the side of Ukraine, Ukraine would end. The Russian representatives asked just a couple of minutes ago here in this council, why would we think that Ukraine would end? Well, because 1 year ago, your president just told us that he would like to demilitarize Ukraine. And we saw for 365 nights and days what that meant. That your tanks didn't bring water, that your planes didn't drop baby nutrition, but your tanks and planes only brought night and day destruction and death of thousands of fathers and mothers and children. And yes, it brought also death and destruction around the world, not directly by tanks and bombs, but by the food crisis. And yes, you, everybody on earth, can deceive yourself, but you cannot deceive the world. All those of us who sincerely and honestly believe in a peace that means peace, a peace based on the Charter of our United Nations, must show their true colors now and stand by the peace plan by the General Assembly. President Putin is speculating that at some point our clear stance against this war will weaken. He is speculating that by staying the course, this war of aggression will be rewarded for a war that is also causing great suffering to his own people. Some 200,000 Russians have already been killed or wounded. Hundreds of thousands of Russians have left their country because they don't want to be part of this war. Russian children going to schools in Germany, and I'm very happy about this. More than 1,000 international companies have pulled out of Russia, taking with them a crucial part of Russia's prosperity and intelligence. This war is not the world's war. This war is not the war of the Russian people. This war is Putin's war. The Russian president is risking the future of his own country, of his own soldiers, his own children. That's why a just peace, a peace plan presented yesterday by the 141 states at the General Assembly, is also in the interest of the people of Russia. When I look around this table, I'm under no illusion. We will not convince the Russian representative today. He's not even listening. But what we can do is that this council will not turn a blind eye to Bucha, Kharkiv, Mariupol, and Bakhmut, to the people and the children of Ukraine. What we can do is stand up for a world where peace means peace. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency, Ms. Baerbock, for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Edgars Rinkēvičs, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Latvia.
Mr. President, I'm speaking on behalf of Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Lithuania, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Latvia. I thank the Secretary General for his briefing and the Presidency of Malta for the opportunity to address the Security Council. A year has passed since Russia started its brutal, unjustified, and unprovoked full-scale war of aggression against Ukraine, aided by Belarus. It is a clear violation of international law and the United Nations Charter. We admire the bravery and persistence of Ukrainians in the fight for their freedom and independence. We pay respect to all Ukrainian people who have died defending their homeland. Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine has trampled international norms and rules-based order. Russia, a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, is seeking to change the borders of a neighboring sovereign country by military force. This constitutes a serious threat to international peace and security. We will never accept Russia's illegal annexations of Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia oblasts. We call on the Russian Federation to abide by the ICJ order on provisional measures of March 16, 2022, to immediately suspend its military operations that commenced on 21st February 2022 in Ukraine. Russia cynically disregards its obligations as a permanent member and hampers the Security Council's ability to implement its mandate. Russia started this war. Russia can and must end it immediately by withdrawing its troops from the internationally recognized territory of Ukraine. To make it happen, we must provide all necessary means to Ukraine. Under the UN Charter, Ukraine has inherent right of self-defense. The Nordic Baltic states are determined to enhance Ukraine's military capabilities and to provide all necessary support. Mr. President, unable to defeat Ukraine in its battlefield, Russia terrorizes Ukraine's civilian population. Mass killings, rapes, and torture in Bucha and Izium, and illegal deportation of children are only some of the most horrifying atrocity crimes of the Russian armed forces. We condemn in the strongest terms deliberate attacks by Russia against civilians, critical infrastructure, and civilian objects in Ukraine. To alleviate the suffering and facilitate reconstruction, we provide economic, political, humanitarian, financial, and legal assistance to Ukraine and its people. Mr. President, Russia must and will be held accountable for its crimes. We support the work of the International Criminal Court to investigate atrocity crimes. In addition, the crime of aggression must be addressed to bring to justice the Russian political and military leadership, who masterminded and unleashed this war of aggression against Ukraine. We believe that the UN should play a meaningful role in securing broad international support for the establishment of a tribunal for the prosecution of the crime of aggression. Mr. President, Russia uses disinformation and propaganda to mobilize domestic and international support for its aggression against Ukraine. It is extremely worrying that Russia uses food and energy as instruments in its warfare. It causes suffering for the most vulnerable nations and people globally. Russia is cynically covering it by false narratives and disinformation, including by dishonestly blaming sanctions. It is Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine that has aggravated an already existing food security crisis and augmented the rise in energy prices. We support the Black Sea Grain Initiative and urge Russia to extend it and stop delaying the work of inspection teams. Mr. President, yesterday the General Assembly once again reconfirmed international support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We urge the UN Security Council to uphold the UN Charter, which forms the basis for just and lasting peace in Ukraine. We welcome President Zelensky's 10-point peace formula. We strongly support his vision for peace that rests in international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter. We will stand by Ukraine for as long as necessary. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Rinkevičius, for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Ruslan Bolbosyan, Secretary of State of the Republic of Moldova.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council's Excellencies, the Republic of Moldova strongly condemns Russia's illegal and unfounded aggression against Ukraine. We also categorically reject the attempted annexation of Ukrainian territories. As we commemorate 1 year of this brutal war, we mourn the enormous human losses, significant destruction of civilian infrastructure, and the displacement of countless Ukrainians who have been forced to flee their homes to escape the horrors of war. Moldova is one of the countries which sheltered hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian people. We will continue our support to Ukraine for as long as it takes. Ukraine defends its land and its freedom, and by that it defends our freedom and our democracy too. We appreciate Ukraine's incredible resistance. We stand in solidarity with our neighbors and our friends. We stand with Ukraine. Distinguished audience, Moldova, Ukraine's most fragile neighbors, has been greatly impacted by Russia's unprovoked aggressions. As while Ukraine is resisting a military invasion, Moldova is on the front line of a hybrid war which includes inter alia gas blackmail, cyber attacks, propaganda, and disinformation. On several occasions, our airspace has been violated by Russia's missiles, and missiles debris landed on our territory, which is absolutely unacceptable. Let me also stress that the breakaway Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova is getting regularly in the spotlight, including in the recent days. Our country is firmly committed to maintaining stability and peace in the region in this complicated context, and to promote political settlement of the conflict based on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Moldova within its internationally recognized borders. We reiterate our position for complete withdrawal of Russian military forces and munition storage illegally present in the region. All these challenges are real, but so is our resolve to stay strong. The Republic of Moldova expresses its deep gratitude to all partners who have supported us in this time of crisis. Despite all those risks, Moldova remains committed to its path toward European Union integration, which represents the best way to ensure peace, stability, and prosperity for the country. Mr. President, over the past year, Ukraine has faced an unprecedented attack against its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Throughout this time, the international community has stood firmly with Ukraine in condemning the aggression and supporting Ukraine's efforts to defend its people and territory. We have seen remarkable displays of solidarity, from the provision of humanitarian assistance to the diplomatic efforts to bring about a peaceful resolution to the conflict. The large support extended yesterday by the UN General Assembly to the resolution outlining the principles of comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine is another remarkable sign of strong support in that regards. Moldova supports Ukraine in achieving a just peace and accountability. We join the calls for immediate cessation of hostilities and complete and unconditional withdrawal of the Russian military troops and ammunition from the territory of Ukraine. In closing, the Republic of Moldova reaffirms its unwavering support to Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Bobosyan for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Wopke Hoekstra, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm here today on behalf of the Group of Friends of Accountability following the aggression against Ukraine. A group of 49 member states and the European Union that share one strong conviction: that the power of justice should always prevail over the power of force. Today, it has been exactly 1 year since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And the people of Ukraine have shown extraordinary courage and resilience in their continued fight for freedom and independence. And we've seen horrendous images and reports of the indiscriminate killing of civilians, men, women, and children. We've seen unlawful attacks on civilian infrastructure, houses, schools, and hospitals. And we have seen horrendous reports of sexual and gender-based violence and abductions of children. Mr. President, such actions are unacceptable. They violate international law. And wherever they occur, they must be met with the same strong response. This cannot stand. Accountability and justice for Ukraine, for Ukrainians, and for the international community as a whole is of the utmost importance to ensure a sustainable peace. Yesterday, the General Assembly resumed its emergency special session on Ukraine. And once again, the General Assembly took a strong stance in defense of the UN Charter by adopting a resolution on the Charter's principles, underlying a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. And in this resolution, the General Assembly emphasized the need to ensure accountability for the most serious crimes under international law committed on the territory of Ukraine. Mr. President, our quest for justice, our fight against impunity, our fight against violations of international law should not, must not, and cannot be pursued without taking a firm collective stand against the aggressor. We commend the efforts and initiatives already taken to ensure accountability. This includes the deployment of forensic missions to Ukraine, the opening of an investigation by the ICC prosecutor, the creation of an international center for the prosecution of the crime of aggression, and a register for damages to be located in The Hague. We welcome the establishment of the independent UN Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine and the establishment of the OSCE Moscow mechanism. We commend the ongoing work of the Human Rights Monitoring Mission, which has documented violations since 2014. Of particular concern are the reports of conflict-related sexual violence, including rape as a tactic of war. And these crimes constitute serious violations of international humanitarian law. Conflict-related sexual violence must be countered through effective accountability measures. Measures that will contribute to deterrence and prevention of these horrendous crimes. Mr. President, Russia's aggression against Ukraine violates the UN Charter, which underpins peaceful coexistence and global security. And we call on the Russian Federation to abide by the order on provisional measures by the ICJ of March 16th of 2022. The court stated that Russia shall immediately end the military operations that it commenced on February 24th, 2022 in the territory of Ukraine. This is the first step to put an end to the all too long list of crimes which require accountability and which require justice. The first step, to put an end to human suffering in Ukraine and ease the human suffering caused by Russia's war in Ukraine, but clearly also globally. Mr. President, the violation of the UN Charter we are witnessing today is an attack on the international community as a whole. We should not just seek accountability for what has already been taking place. We must strive to prevent anyone, and I mean anyone, from committing such a violation ever again, in Ukraine or elsewhere. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Hoekstra, for his statement. And I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Tajani, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy.
Mr. President, on this day, exactly 1 year ago, a permanent member of this Council unilaterally violated the basic principles and norms on which the peaceful coexistence among states and this very organization are founded. Far from bearing a greater sense of duty and responsibility as a permanent member, with this unacceptable behavior, Russia has profoundly shaken and questioned the roots of the international order. On this anniversary, Ukraine still stands, and together with the wide majority of the international community, Italy stands alongside Ukraine in full solidarity with its people.
But when I listen to somebody who talks about Europe, which is a slave of the United States, I need to say that we are slaves of freedom, of democracy, of international law. So we need to completely reject this idea of a Europe being a slave to anybody. We are the homeland of freedom and democracy throughout the world. It is unacceptable what I heard this morning here in this chamber.
Russia's illegal, unprovoked and justified act of aggression against Ukraine not only is a gross violation of the United Nations Charter and a threat to international security and stability, but is also causing global systematic disruption with multiple harmful consequences that majorly affects the most vulnerable countries in this global south. We need more diplomacy. And as the Secretary General said, the Black Sea Grain Initiative is a sign of hope to address global concerns on such harmful consequences and to display that ground for dialogue can and must be found. Italy strongly calls, in the first place, for the renewal of the Black Sea Grain Initiative and for the swift establishment of a nuclear safe zone around Zaporizhzhia nuclear power point. Pedimos también.
We have also asked for a stronger United Nations. We are asking for a more democratic, representative, transparent United Nations, because the United Nations can do more, involving more countries of the world. Because after the Second World War, from the Second World War to today, the world has changed a great deal, and that is why we need to involve many countries in this reform.
Mr. President, the daily attacks to Ukrainian people and to critical infrastructures with devastating humanitarian costs are completely unacceptable and must immediately stop. We want to work for peace. We are not against the Russian citizens. We are in favor of democracy, in favor of freedom. We want to respect the international rules. This is our engagement. For this, we are strongly involved in defense of Ukraine. But we want to achieve peace, peace with justice. Justice, freedom, and independence of Ukraine. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Tajani, for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Bujar Osmani, Minister of Foreign Affairs of North Macedonia.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I am grateful to Maltese Presidency for the opportunity to address the UN Security Council today as we mark 1 year since the beginning of the full-scale invasion on territory of Ukraine. This unprovoked and brutal war of aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine is a blatant violation of international law and all principles enshrined in the UN Charter and, above all, the values of humanity. Let me reaffirm at the outset our support to the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Both in my national capacity and later on in my capacity as chairman in office of the OSCE for 2023, I had the opportunity to visit Ukraine and places that have been affected by the war and attacks made by the military forces of the Russian Federation. I saw firsthand the human suffering, destruction, and other consequences of this senseless war of aggression. Mass indiscriminate strikes on civilian sites persists. People continue to die and suffer. Russia has continued to conduct strikes in urban areas, leaving civilians and cities without access to basic human needs. The finding and investigation so far in the various cities attacked in Ukraine lead to the conclusion that war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed. The magnitude of committed sexual abuse and violence against women and girls is of grave concern as well. The perpetrators of these crimes and violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law must be held accountable and brought to justice. In my capacity as chairman in office of the OSCE, I have already underscored on many occasions, and here today I would like to put emphasis again on the OSCE Moscow mechanism as an important source invoked with the aim to establish the facts and circumstances of possible cases of war crimes and crimes against humanity in order to presenting it to the relevant accountability mechanisms as well as to the international courts. The second report issued recently confirms the aforesaid. Mr. President, we fully support the investigation launched by the ICC prosecutor aimed at looking into war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in the territory of Ukraine. Previously, we have also welcomed the International Court of Justice provisional measures ordering Russia to suspend military operations immediately. Making full use and ensuring sustainable funding of existing human rights mechanisms is also crucial in support of the accountability processes. North Macedonia believes that we should make better use of the work and information gathered by special procedures of the Human Rights Council in order to investigate violation and abuses of human rights and related crimes in the context of the war of aggression against Ukraine. In conclusion, in the coming period, it will be particularly important to curtail any political process that can undermine the accountability for gross violations committed. We must do our utmost to ensure access to justice for the victims of human rights violation in this senseless aggression by the Russian Federation. Our motto for North Macedonia's OSCE chairpersonship is, "It's about people." We owe it to them to restore peace immediately. We call on the Russian Federation to stop the war. We reiterate our demand for the immediate cessation of the military aggression against Ukraine, as well as for the full and immediate withdrawal of its forces and military equipment from Ukraine's territory. We have to bring back the peace, and the accountability must prevail. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Osmani for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. José Manuel Álvarez Bueno, Minister of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation of Spain.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for organizing this meeting. Today marks 1 year since the tragic start of the illegal occupation and violation by Russia against Ukraine in flagrant violation of international law and the principles of the UN Charter. The very existence of Ukraine is at stake, as well as peace and the most basic principles of the UN Charter. This violation is even more unacceptable as it comes from a permanent member of this Security Council, the body to which the UN Charter confers the key responsibility of maintaining international peace and security and of safeguarding the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Every day, Russian troops remain in the sovereign and independent territory of Ukraine undermines this remit. Spain fully supports the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Spain, like many others who have spoken here today and in the General Assembly of the United Nations, is calling for the immediate, complete and unconditional withdrawal of all the military forces of the Russian Federation from the entire Ukrainian territory and a return to their internationally recognized borders. There is no argument whatsoever to justify this aggression. Moreover, we express our most categoric condemnation of the indiscriminate shelling by Russia against key civilian infrastructure and targets. This is an unacceptable violation of international humanitarian law. Thousands of civilians, Ukrainian civilians, have been identified and have died as a result of the war, and more than 14 million are displaced. There are alarming signs of massive violations of human rights of the Ukrainian population. Those who are responsible for these very serious acts must be held accountable. Spain will fully, unreservedly support that. And the use of the veto by the Russian Federation is keeping the Security Council from exercising its primary function as a guarantor of international peace and security. No country should have the capacity to flout this right for its own purposes as if it were a blank check to violate international law without any consequence. This veto, however, does not keep the international community from reacting. Yesterday, the General Assembly spoke out quite clearly on this issue, reiterating its call for Russia to withdraw from the entirety of Ukrainian territory. And also, the General Assembly reaffirmed its commitment to the independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine and called for a just and lasting peace in respect of the UN Charter and international law. That is why we are here today in the Security Council. We are not just facing war in Ukraine and in Europe. The unilateral action of Russia is also an attack against the most basic norms and principles governing relations among states, which are an absolute condition for the maintenance of international peace and security. It is the founding principle of this organization, and therefore we call for an immediate cessation to aggression and the withdrawal of Russian troops to their internationally recognized borders and respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. We want peace for Ukraine, for the Ukrainian people, but also for all of us who defend the UN Charter and international law. Thank you.
Thank His Excellency Mr. Alvarez Bueno. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jan Libavsky, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Czechia.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to participate in this Security Council debate. Czechia hosts the highest number of Ukrainian war refugees per capita, nearly 500,000, most of them women and children. We are one of the countries most affected by the direct consequences of Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine. Russia's cruel, full-scale aggression started 1 year ago, its illegal annexation of Crimea 9 years ago. Russia sees other countries, their freedom, their democracy, or even their statehood as nothing but spoils up for grabs in its colonialistic and imperialistic ambition. Yet, the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders is non-negotiable. Consequences of Russia's aggression reach far beyond Europe. They are truly global. The war it wages has caused shockwaves for the world commodity markets, threatening to drive 50 million people to the brink of famine across Africa and other continents. Russia's massive airstrikes, deliberately conducted in densely populated areas, are destroying critical civilian infrastructure and innocent lives. Entire towns and villages have been wiped out. The evidence of Russia's atrocities and ferocious attacks against Ukraine's civilian population, including children, is overwhelming. Just a few days ago, President Putin announced Russia's suspensions of the New START treaty. For him, escalation is the order of the day. We must collectively stop Russia from dragging us into the horrors similar to those of the world wars. Together, we have to defend the UN Charter. Accountability for all crimes under international law must be ensured. Yesterday, the United Nations General Assembly resolution, Principles Underlying a Comprehensive, Just and Lasting Peace in Ukraine, was adopted by a huge majority of votes. The international community has spoken clearly about its strong wish for peace in line with the UN Charter. The peace formula plan presented by President Zelensky is the one to be built on. We stand with Ukraine from the outset, and we remain committed to Ukraine's wish for a just peace, as well as its undeniable right in line with Article 59 of the UN Charter to defend itself against the aggression. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Lepavki for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Gordon Grlić-Radman, Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Affairs of Croatia.
Croatia aligns itself with the statement of the EU, and I'd like to add some remarks in my national capacity. One year ago, the Russian Federation sent more than 100,000 of its soldiers, tanks and warplanes to invade Ukraine, with more to come. Russia's troops marched from the east and from the north, from the neighboring Belarus, in an attempt to break Ukraine's resistance in one swift move. This full-scale invasion is in fact a dramatic escalation of the aggression that began in 2014 with the Russian occupation of Crimea and parts of Donetsk and the Luhansk regions of Ukraine. This was brought nothing but loss of life, countless injury, suffering and destruction. It also brought with itself series of atrocities, accompanied by targeted destruction of civilian infrastructure and mass displacement of people. Accountability for these crimes is important to provide at least some comfort and a sense of justice to the victims and their families, but it would also serve as a warning and a deterrent to other potential perpetrators. The misery brought upon by the Russian aggression did not just end within the borders of Ukraine. Its poisonous effects were and are felt around the world as food and energy insecurity become widespread globally. This deadly war aims not just to conquer Ukraine and strip it of its independence. It aims to invalidate the UN Charter and the very tenets of the international law. It aims to dismantle global security and usher in an age where brute force and land grab are the accepted norm. Mr. President, the Russian army invaded Ukraine, not the other way around. Nothing can hide that obvious fact. Although each country assembled here at the United Nations has its own concerns and aspirations and turns to its different friends for help, in this war there is only one side we can stand on, the side protecting the right of a country to defend itself. It is our duty to support this just cause. Not so long ago, Croatia was a victim to a very similar war, with almost the same pretext and cynical justification. In that difficult situation, every help mattered, even if it amounted to mere acknowledgement of the enduring tragedy. Even it was just worth recognizing victimization. One such resolution acknowledging the tragedy and injustice thrown upon Ukraine was adopted overwhelmingly yesterday by the UN General Assembly. With some exceptions, the world continues to support Ukraine, as well as self-defense of its people. After a year, they are not getting tired, so shall not we in our support. However, we do not accept normalization of this cruel war deliberately targeting civilians. Russia started this war, and Russia is the only one that can stop it by removing its troops from Ukraine. Until such moment comes, Croatia will continue to stand by and with Ukraine and its people, its independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within internationally recognized borders. We admire the bravery and dignity of Ukrainians defending their country and their homes, and we owe them gratitude for standing for the crucial principles of the UN Charter and rules-based international order. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Radman for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Urmas Reinsalu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia.
Thank you. Mr. President, Estonia is a neighbor of aggressor state Russia, and this war has impacted my country significantly. We have received tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees. During the course of war, we have been under systematic cyber attacks coming from Russia. Russia has been waging its full-scale, brutal, unprovoked and genocidal war of aggression against Ukraine for 12 months now. Kremlin's goal to erase a sovereign and democratic Ukraine from the map has not changed. After a year of courageous fight, Ukraine deserves peace more than ever. However, it can't be a peace at all costs. We need just and lasting peace in full conformity with the UN Charter. Peace that upholds and reinforces rules-based international order with the UN and its core. Peace that prevents the use of force to redraw international borders. And these are exactly the same parameters that our overwhelming majority of the UN member states voted for in the UN General Assembly resolution yesterday. The UN membership firmly supports a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine that rests on international law and the UN Charter. The Ukrainian peace plan is based on the same universal values and principles, and I therefore call upon the UN membership to support President Zelensky's 10-point peace plan. Article 51 of the UN Charter grants every country a right to self-defense, and we need collectively to ensure that Ukraine can defend itself against the aggressor. We have seen the heinous atrocities that Russia has committed and unfortunately still is committing today in Ukraine. This must stop, and this is the reason why Estonia's military aid to Ukraine has reached 1% of our GDP. And we want sovereign Ukraine to survive this brutal aggression and win, because then peace and justice will be established. We call all peoples of the world to raise any support to Ukraine. Third, in order to achieve lasting peace, full accountability must be ensured. It includes our obligation to discredit completely aggression as an instrument of international relations. We owe it to the thousands of Ukrainians being killed, raped and forcibly displaced to hold Russia's political and military leadership to account for the crime of aggression. Therefore, an international special tribunal for the crime of aggression in Ukraine within the UN system must be established. We cannot let Mr. Putin hide in the judicial loophole. President Putin, time will come and you will sit under tribunal. It is high time to learn from the past. The horrors of war we are witnessing today are the tragic consequences of the fact that the atrocity crimes committed by the Soviet Union during the Second World War, including against my country and my people, were left unpunished. Not only would a tribunal serve justice to the victims of this horrendous crime, it also serves as a deterrent and can help to prevent future conflicts. Finally, today on the 105th anniversary of my country, Estonia's declaration of independence, our Independence Day, my thoughts are with our brave countrymen and women who fought for our freedom and independence. And yet I also pray for Ukraine and Ukrainians, who are the bravest people I know. Ukraine is not only defending its country, people and right to exist, but Ukraine is also defending common values of united mankind, international legal order and the UN Charter. Peace rises from truth. Russian Federation is a terrorist regime which commits genocide against Ukrainian people. The world needs to recognize that. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Reinsalu, for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.